I think Invasion of the Body Snatchers is everywhere.
The whole film was done in a spirit of great fun.
What the hell is it? They grow out of those pods.
There seems to be always some interest somewhere to remake Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and that's got to be a testament to the original theme buried in the Siegel and Jack Finney book that, you know, we're constantly afraid of something in any era.
Well, Jack Finney wrote basically a science fiction story that was turned into a film by Don Siegel, a wonderful film. When I was thinking about doing this, I happened to know Don Siegel, and I went into his office to say, I'm thinking of doing a remake of this movie of yours that I really respect a lot. It's a beautifully done film. And as I was talking to Don, who should pop in but Kevin McCarthy, who this was on the MGM lot, and he was doing another movie. And the two of them sat down with me and they started telling me what they really had in mind. Even though they liked the original, they had an ending that didn't let the audience off the hook. Also, they had some humor that the studio cut out.
They took it down to Long Beach and showed the film. And the film was terrific, you know, and they were so thrilled because you would have laughter and then screams, and then laughter and then screams, and then laughter and then really screams. It was perfect. And they took it back, and they were so thrilled. They took it back to Allied Artists, and they showed the film, and they played them the recording of the sneak audience. And Allied Artists, the executive said, "Get rid of the laughter." You go, oh God.
The studio, didn't feel that humor in a horror movie really mixed. But to my mind, and really to Don Siegel's mind, that could only make the film scarier, which is one of the reasons I wanted to do a remake of it. I don't really look on our version as a remake, because it's really totally different. It goes back to Jack Finney's source, but it's really a reimagining, in a way, a variation on a theme. We could explore a little bit more of the characters and what makes a pod and what makes people be not pods, and is that not poddiness worth preserving? And that was sort of what Bob Solo, W.D. Richter, and I really set out to do.
Well, the Finney book, I think, is popular through the years because it plays on a fear that we all have, that people around us are turning secretly on us behind our backs, and if we close our eyes, they'll get us. And that plays out over decades because we're always afraid of somebody.
We started out with the same small city idea that was in Jack Finney's novel, which really was someplace north of here.
And that was very difficult because it seemed like the world was somewhere else, and here we were in the boondocks, you know, thinking about, well, what are even the locations? Where do people live?
And then we sort of felt that as time went on, 20 years had passed really since that film was made, that the real paranoia was starting to lurk more and more in big cities. We decided, let's see what we can do with paranoia coming to a big city. And the basic thing that came to me, probably when I was talking with Kevin McCarthy, was to say, well, how can I get Kevin into this movie? Let's just suppose that he had left the last movie where he wanted to leave it, which is running out of the small town saying they're here, and let's just suppose that he ran for 20 years trying to spread the word. The British are coming, the pods are coming, whatever it was.
Lock the door! Lock the door!
They're coming! They're coming! Help! Help! They're coming! They're coming! Listen to me! Listen! Help me! You're next, please! Please! You're next! We're in danger! Please, listen to me! Something terrible! Please! You're next! Here they are! They're already here! Come! You're next! They're coming! They're coming!
Must have done something.
I lived in San Francisco, and you know, it's my favorite city, really my favorite city in the world.
And it seemed like the right place, you know, it had that kind of San Francisco, slightly offbeat quality, which the characters in the movie have, you know. Jeff Goldblum's a failed poet, and Kibner's a sort of goofy psychologist who writes self-help books and things. You know, it all had a kind of nice San Francisco air to it.
The context of the movie was in a kind of a feel-good therapy atmosphere where hugging and explaining away all your problems as sort of psychological projections of these inner things, all that stuff was very current at the time.
It was a time when we still believed, sort of, that we could affect something in this country.
We'd grown so disillusioned with the larger society around us, with the treachery of the government, with things that just weren't working right, that this big inward look started taking place, the me generation, a huge cliche of pop culture. But nevertheless, people were closing off. Under sort of cover of we're all reaching out to find out who we are and to be one kind of, you know, one Earth, one planet. But to get there, you have this sense of, I got to find out who I am first. I've got to become very self-centered, very inward-directed and looking in.
1978, sort of the end of a kind of hippie era, you know, there was still, you know, a residue of that, but there were also, as exemplified by Leonard Nimoy, the kind of pop psychologists who were telling everybody to relax, everything's going to be okay, take it easy. In a sense, trying to humanize people by dehumanizing them in some way. He did a lot of, you know, little variations on that character.
Leonard Nimoy, he was terrific. He was a lot of fun, and of course, coming off of, you know, Star Trek, which he had been on, and that's automatically what you think.
There's a little bit of the sternness of Spock in there, but there's that softness that Leonard added of the Birkenstock sandals and the arm pads and, you know, little thing he wears on his hand and the soft tailoring and the soothing voice. You know, he turned into a really interesting character. The last person you might think would become a pod becomes one of the early pods.
Don't be trapped by old concepts. Matthew. You're evolving into a new life form. Come and watch.
The idea of the pod became a symbol or a metaphor of the standardized thing that the culture was asking of us. It was asking us all to create a new mass culture, something that would work on the world scale, and in order to do that, you had to sacrifice some individuality. So you had to get squeezed down into some kind of a pod.
And that's one of the interesting paradox of the film, is that these things, these elements of individuality are sort of shunned by pods.
There's no need for hate now, or love.
I love you, Matthew.
When I think about what might have inspired me or Phil or all of us to make this version, I don't think of science fiction because science fiction tended to be drifting toward big pyrotechnical effects and larger-than-life dangers and monsters and threats, and the budgets were going up. And we were really interested in a human story here.
Our Body Snatchers is really about, you know, characters and developing that human thing. I always viewed it as sort of a tragic love story between Donald Sutherland, Brooke Adams, but also between a band of friends, you know, all of whom in one way or another love each other.
There's a nice moment where Donald Sutherland has Elizabeth, the character Elizabeth, roll her eyes around in her head. And although it's a crazy thing, to him it proves she's not crazy.
If you're not crazy, you can do the thing with your eyes. You're not crazy.
That was such a human, such a charming thing, and the way Donald reacts to her and looks at her, you know, there's something, you know, none of us could have anticipated the kind of love that passes between them, but it's a love of friendship.
It was a very for me, a very creative experience. I loved working with Veronica and Brooke. Leonard was terrific. Jeff is good.
Jeff Goldblum and Veronica Cartwright, they call themselves the dancing Belichicks. They come dancing through our set doing a pas de deux.
This all started when we were in the showers, because they had all those shower curtains, and so we would come in and we'd have to see, and then we'd go like this, and we would have to run off and to get the angle and the way the curtains were blowing and everything like that, and be able to pick the guy up that was in the bathtub and stuff like that. We got to the point, we did it so many times, we would do da-da-da-da-da, we were just sort of, so we became known as the dancing Belichicks, and we would sort of dance on together and dance off. It was hysterical.
You know, films should be fun to make. You gather your group of friends around, people, even though you know what you're going for in each scene, you leave enough room and enough air in the film for creative people to add certain things. So, yeah, my wife Rose plays a small role. A bunch of writer friends of mine are in the bookstore. You know, throughout the piece there are San Francisco actors, friends of mine, who in one way or another are transformed into pods.
All the film people of San Francisco wanted to be pods, but we were very selective on who we would let be pods. You had to earn it.
Mike Chapman is in the film. He plays a guy who's sort of cleaning, polishing the floors of the health department, and there's something ominous about it.
They are wonderful people in it, you know. I mean, you turn around, and I love Bobby Duvall, and you turn around and he's there. He's just a priest in the corner. I love that. Don Siegel played the taxi driver.
I'm sure I've told this story before, but it's true. I was in the front seat, in the passenger seat in the front, with a handheld camera, filming them in the back, and then filming Don Siegel from the side and all that. And I remember thinking that, boy, they're really acting well. They look scared in their back and everything. And I found out that what they were scared of was that Don Siegel could barely see, but out of vanity had taken his glasses off and was driving through the streets of San Francisco. And Donald and Brooke were genuinely scared.
Where exactly are you heading?
I said, the airport,
No, I mean, which airline?
United.
I remember we were running one night, running through the streets. You know, there was so much running through the streets, and Brooke Adams was really a great runner, and Donald was, you know, I remember him running all the time in the mornings. But as they were running one night, Brooke said, "I can beat you, Donald."
Tus tráilers.
He said, come on, yeah. So, you know, I said, action, and they went running, and I said, cut, and they didn't stop running, and she was in her high heels and a red dress, and they just went running off into the distance, and when they came back, she said, I won. You could ask Donald if she won.
I have way longer legs than Brooke has. Yeah, I could outrun her way. I ran a lot during that period, and when I was running, I was crossing the street this way, and a Volkswagen Beetle had not seen me and made a right turn and hit me, and I bounced up over his roof, and as I came down, my face passed his windscreen, and I could see the driver's mouth saying, "Oh God, not you."
If you look at Donald Sutherland as the main character, as the Hamlet of our piece, so to speak, it's really the story of the development of a pod. And if you were a pod audience out there, you'd be very happy with the way he comes out at the end of the movie.
The end scene, Donald had been told something and I was told something else, and it was not scripted. We didn't know how it was going to end.
You know, they all, you know, wanted to be part of the big dialogue, you know, that we all know what the scene is in general, and then it's my job to privately go with each of them and tell them things that the other people in the scene might not know about what their character is going to do.
I had been told one thing to do, and he had been told what he was to do. And then we just went in, and I called for him. I thought he was normal. And then he turned around and did that weird thing. And so the whole end was like totally spontaneous.
Well, making this movie was one of the truly pleasurable experiences in a business that doesn't really offer you that many thoroughgoing, wonderful times.
It seems to me that the movie works in that way of just having a wonderful, jolly good time for an hour and a half or 2 hours. And we went into it with that frame of mind, and I think it shows in the movie.
It was an exciting and very pure and politically sensible and intellectually and heartfelt. It was stable to be in, and it continues to garner praise. People still watch it. It was a pleasure to do it.
Well, the opening sequence, we decided, it should begin on another planet. We had no money. I mean, the film was pretty low-budgeted movie for a Hollywood movie.
The set was a piece of plywood. It was relatively small. I think it was 28 inches wide, about 24 inches deep. There was a landscape that was integrated into the plywood. It was actually consisting of ground-up volcanic rock to make this kind of sandy, desert-looking area. And then the foreground was the same volcanic rock, but it was in big chunks and had a look of forced perspective. So at least from one angle, with a very wide lens, it would look like the set was very, very large. The other component was the background of stars and planets, and that consisted of a plexiglass sheet that was painted with deep black, and then holes were just pecked out of it to give you the illusion of stars. And then there was a sun that was kind of modeled and looked like it was, had a bad case of measles, and that was supposed to be the sun that was going to doom this planet and cause these spores to go and try to find a better home.
With the guys who were doing special effects down in LA, I was trying to figure out how to get something that would float from one planet to another.
While I was doing the set, I was also trying to accumulate all these different chemicals that you could stick into water, and so I would go to the local drugstore and just get bags full of lip gloss, finger paint, and gels and whatever. When Phil came down, he looked at the set and he said, "Well, that's pretty promising. Where's my creatures?" And he was actually I think he was pretty disturbed, but he needed to see the creatures, and we didn't have anything.
I found in an art store a big bottle of gelatinous slime, really. I think it cost $10.
When you initially put it into water, it was very much transparent. It was almost invisible. So if you let it sit a couple of seconds, like 30 seconds, it would develop this beautiful kind of a whitish film, and all of a sudden turn into something that looked very organic.
And then, we basically experimented by reversing motions, dropping it through water, showing it rise off a created background of a planet.
The aerial sequence required the point of view of the spores as they were falling down through clouds into San Francisco. The idea was to do very nice, smooth zooms, kind of like initially kind of slow and then pop as you went all the way in.
It was the kind of approach that I really took through when I did a film a few years later called The Right Stuff. For the airplanes flying and stuff, I really believed sort of in, organic effects in a way, and effects that could be jerry-rigged, that would feel more human, that had a human touch rather than a mechanical touch.
The last part was, there's a sequence of the pods as they fell upon leaves, and in those sequences you could see a blob of this gel material, and out of the blob you could see little tendrils start creeping out, so we immediately knew something was going on. And then the next shot was these blobs now with tendrils evolved into the pods, and then the pods sprouted small flowers. All of the sequences involving the pods either flowering or sprouting tendrils were all shot in reverse. It amounted to pulling nylon threads through the surface of a leaf and pulling back these little tendrils through the blob, or in the case of the flower petals were made out of latex, or cast latex, and we just pulled them gently back into the pod. So that's kind of the story of how that whole sequence evolved from just like what are we going to do? How are you going to simulate this with very little budget and very little time? And to go do it.
Sound brings a film to life in a way, and this is especially true in fantasy films, in which there won't be any sound on the set to record for creatures or for space flight or for unusual environments. Those sounds will be created after the film takes place, and once those sounds are put in the soundtrack, suddenly the movie takes on quite a different meaning. My name is Ben Burt, and I created special sound effects for the Invasion of the Body Snatchers. I'm a sound designer, and my job is to imagine what the sounds in the movie are going to be, and then to create them. The term sound designer came about here in Northern California back in the first days of Star Wars, because the filmmakers up here recognized that they wanted someone on the production to be responsible for customizing the sound for a motion picture. And so my job, as well as other sound designers that emerged at that time, was to create special sounds that were designed specifically for the dramatic needs of a given motion picture. I became involved with Invasion of the Body Snatchers soon after Star Wars, because post-production on Star Wars was done in Northern California, and they asked me after the completion of Star Wars to stay on and to handle any other sound design work that would come up for future Lucasfilm productions. And so I had met Phil Kaufman because he was an acquaintance and colleague of George Lucas, and he came to me and they said they needed some special sounds for Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and could I spend some time creating some sounds for them. After Star Wars, I was in a mode in which I'd found the success of organic sound effects in a motion picture. By that I mean taking real sounds in the real world, recording them, altering them maybe slightly, and then putting them in a movie soundtrack. So I took the same approach on Body Snatchers. I thought, well, okay, they need some otherworldly sounds of these alien pod entities coming from another world, and I think we talked right away that we wanted something that brought to mind the sense of birth. So I was set out on a path right away to record birth-like sounds. In the sequence where the pods grow and come to life in the garden, they're being born. And oddly enough, at that time, my wife was pregnant with our first child. One day I had a doctor's appointment to listen with a microphone to the sonogram, the sonic sounds of this unborn child, which we didn't know was a boy or a girl. So I took my tape recorders with me, thinking, well, there might be some good birth sounds here. And of course there was fantastic sounds. At that time, it was a new thing to listen to the child, developing in the womb. You could place a microphone against the mother and listen to the heartbeat. And you hear, depending on where you put the mic, you hear a funny, weird, almost kind of heartbeat sound. And it has a sense of wind, it has a sense of liquid and almost a squishiness to it. And I recorded those sounds. Some of the heartbeat was the real recordings from made on with the microphone on my wife's pregnant belly, and then I made some heartbeats on a synthesizer. You could program the synthesizer to make a thumping sound, and then you could tap a key and make what sounds like a heartbeat. Much in the way a heartbeat you hear yourself internally. The breathing sounds came from 3 different sources, as I recall. One of them was I just did strange breathing myself. As sound designers do, you close yourself in a room alone where nobody can see you and you perform different sounds. And of course, if you take a breathing sound recording, you can slow it down, and it has a peculiar quality if you do that. The second thing was I did some breathing through a scuba regulator. I'd done some originally for Darth Vader, and so I got some of that equipment back, and I did some different variations. And if you take a small microphone and put it in the tubing of an aqualung, the kind of apparatus you'd normally wear underwater, you can get an interesting quality of breathing because the air is passing through some valves and it's through a pipe, and so it just has a strange quality to it. My recollection is that I also used some breathing which I made from a hand bicycle pump, because you could squeeze and release the pump itself, and you got a little sort of a wheezing sound with it. I had done some experiments on Star Wars but didn't use it, and this sort of led me in this direction. But the sounds of a baby whimpering, or the kind of sounds it makes just before it cries, if you record those and slow them down, it's a very strange, weird sound.
Ben has a way of gathering elements and creating a sound that's complete.
Although Bonnie, I think, certainly enhanced this greatly, the other aspect of the pods coming to life are the husks and the leaves and the actual plant-like elements that are there on the screen.
One of the things my group did, we went to Chinatown and bought every vegetable we could find. We ripped apart in Foley and recorded every weird vegetable and fruit. I mean, we learned all about the sounds that food makes, and because when those things pop out and you just hear ripping and tearing and leaves dropping. Ben and I bought a lot of fruits and vegetables for the show. Stepped on them, threw them, squished them, ripped them.
So those sounds became really the foundation for those pods coming to life. Bonnie had the job, of course, of doing all the other sounds in the movie, cars, vehicles, ambulances, whatever it needed.
One of the effects that I'm really pleased with and proud of is the garbage truck sound. There's a running theme visually, I think it occurs 7 times in the film, where garbage trucks carry away, when the pods have taken over the body, the shriveled body of the former person is put in a garbage truck. And I noticed, since I was often driving home in the middle of the night when the garbage trucks come out in San Francisco, that they have this whirring, this high-pitched whirring sound. So I went around with an auger and recorded lots of garbage trucks till I got the whir that I wanted, and then we mixed that. So it's a haunting sound that starts right at the beginning. The very first vehicle crossing the Golden Gate Bridge, right after the main title sequence, is a garbage truck coming into town. And then throughout the film, that garbage truck becomes weirder and weirder and weirder, as every sound effect does.
The film is pretty carefully blanketed by the proper sound effects. There are birds when there need to be, there's sounds of nature. It's the world as we know it. But as we move more and more toward the end, we begin to kill the birds on the soundtrack. We begin to take all the sounds of nature out, so that all that are left are sounds of sirens, sounds of machines, sounds of garbage trucks.
So finally you just hear garbage trucks everywhere, and this whirring is the disappearing people. There were certain target areas that I focused on, and Ben was my mentor at the time and created the most memorable sound, which of course is the pod scream.
I'm not sure where the idea came for the pod shriek, but of course it was a chilling idea because it gave a signature to a fully grown pod creature that was indisputable.
I knew we needed some sort of strange sound, something that was absolutely terrifying. Philip
Kaufman wanted something scary and sudden and very colorful to do it. I utilized what has become common since then, which is to use pigs for shrieks, because pigs have a high pitch, shrill cry. Because they're mammals, it sounds like a person almost, but it isn't. It's not a sound a person can do, but it's a sound you can believe a person can do. So armed with these great pig screams, that became the big basic backbone of the screams. But of course, in the movie, the characters inhale, and then there's this sort of long breath that, and the scream, of course, is quite sustained, more than the pig would do it. So I added to it some breath that I recorded myself. You can kind of create the most wheezy, raspiest breath you can come up with, and record that, and blend it with the pig scream. Of course, the famous one is the very end of the film, where Donald Sutherland makes the final, statement of horror in the movie.
When the film came out, Dolby at the time thought that Body Snatchers was their best soundtrack, and for many years, they may still play it as an example of what Dolby could do.
At the time, they were pioneering the technology of noise reduction, as well as how to split a stereo optical track so that it opened up on the sides and left the dialogue in the middle. So we were trying to open up the tracks and also be able to use surrounds.
For example, when Don Siegel is the cab driver and they're riding through the Broadway tunnel and the motorcycles come on both sides of them and the sound goes from forward in the screen. If you're seeing it in a theater, sort of swirls around you into the surrounds.
Sound is incredibly creepy and psychological. It is more psychological and emotional than picture.
The Philip Kaufman version is one of the darkest color films I've ever seen. I really had to strain to see the details of it, and that's an important part of this process of drawing you in to pay more attention, and then they can shock you with something.
What we really wanted to do here was to try to create in color what film noir did in black and white, and there really hadn't been much of that done. We really didn't have any color precedents there.
And he hired a great cinematographer, Mike Chapman. And if you look at that movie, as I did recently, it's incredible what kind of a contribution Mike made, because it's subtle stuff all over the movie, whether he's shooting through glass or whether he's giving you extraordinary shadow play on the wall.
I'd done already several movies with Phil, and that was always fun, so I jumped at the chance.
We spent a lot of time actually at the Pacific Film Archives looking at a lot of film noir, classics, some of the great cinematographers.
We wanted to emphasize a kind of visual paranoia that you're looking here and you're looking there and you don't know what's going on. So I would act with the camera that way.
There are some Hitchcock techniques that he uses, film noir type of techniques. For instance, when there's an Asian woman who's been infected and her husband is worried about her. When you see that woman, she's in shadow, her face is in shadow, and then she steps out into the light. But that little bit of shadow across her mouth is right out of the Hitchcock playbook, and ties the movie a little bit with this expressionistic world.
That's not my wife.
He and I would go out into the streets together because we wanted that authentic thing of the real San Francisco, of a city, the dawn of pottiness there was lurking there in the streets, and that anybody could be enveloped by it. If a bus goes by and we had a handheld camera and you just see people, exhausted people just sitting there at the end of the day, or just to have the camera move through streets of shoppers having lost their souls in a department store. So one of the ways we did it, I remember, was he would sort of wrap a coat around the camera, and the two of us would just sort of walk down the street, and then he would sort of swing around and follow somebody.
We just wanted to be as discreet as possible, and not call attention to ourselves. So if it was a little airy, probably, and with an eyepiece like that, and I could just, or with nothing, and I could just aim it and figure out where it was going. And if you did that without any lights or without anything calling attention to you, or the assistant director stopping people or stuff like that, you could just wander down the street. And we did.
Riding back from the shoot, he would photograph out the window of the nighttime buildings of San Francisco and catch these sort of eerie people in their offices just before they left at the twilight time. And some of the montages have those stolen moments in them. There's an amazing sequence in the movie inside a bedroom where Donald Sutherland has just brought Kibner in, and Elizabeth is lying in her own greenhouse about to become a pod. It's a very crowded, small room. And it sort of occurred to all of us when Phil tried to block the thing that the room was really small, and there were probably 6 or 7 people in it. And how on earth is he going to cover this? And Mike said, "Give me the camera."
And for that, Mike Chapman dressed totally in black and sort of did a dance through all of the characters so we could shoot 360 degrees without any reflections of the camera showing up.
And he put the camera on his shoulders and said, "Just everybody play the scene." And he stood in the middle of it. And he would just whip around here or there, get a close-up, drag the camera across somebody else.
I did that because I wanted to sort of make the camera be a person and go here at a certain line and there and sort of wander around and look at things, So I did operate it. Yeah.
And it's really wonderful because it's edgy, and you realize the camera's standing in the center of it, and he's trying to, on his feet, solve a disastrous scheduling problem because we would have needed 4 days to figure out how to cover it conventionally.
Mike Chapman had a great appreciation for what the great cameramen had gone before, and not that he was trying to copy them, but just be stimulated by them and be true to what their visions were. And he's a great film scholar.
I think we thought we would sort of have fun with it and have sort of slightly campy shadows and angles and this and that were somewhat self-conscious, because the movie's self-conscious, but I think in a good way.